All right, for today you have done a little worksheet called The Apology of Plato. It's about Socrates. So let's see what your answers are like here. Everybody check your own paper. 1. To whom does Socrates address the remarks in the first part of the selection? Griff, what do you say?
He addresses the Athenians.
And why is he addressing them? Who are they? I mean, they're the Athenians, but what relationship do they have to him? Anybody? Did all of you put the Athenians? You have something else?
No.
Anybody not have the Athenians? Okay, but the Athenians were the ones that condemned him to die. So that's where he's addressing those that condemned him. All right, number 2. Why does Socrates not address his accusers as they would have liked him to, weeping and wailing and lamenting? What do you say about that, Matthew?
So he doesn't seem like weak or like afraid of death.
Okay. Any other ways you put? Any other reasons, Mike?
I said that he said he would rather die speaking in his own manner.
Okay. Which was being truthful. He believed in being truthful. Didn't want to appear like he was trying to escape death. Number 3, to what group of people does Socrates address the remarks in the second part of the selection? Stephen?
The judges and friends who have acquitted him, those who reject the second section.
Right, so the friends who would have acquitted him. Any question about your answer? All right, number 4, in ancient Greece, an oracle was a priestess through whom the gods spoke. In the second part of the selection, Socrates refers to an inner oracle. What does he mean? No?
He has a soul and a heart.
Okay, so it's that voice within him, from his soul, his heart. Any other ways of putting it?
Hide his conscience.
Okay, that would be the equivalent. Anybody else? All right, number 5. What comfort does Socrates get from his inner oracle during this time? John?
When he was getting judged for the right thing. Like, he was doing the right thing even though everyone was saying it was wrong.
Okay, so yeah, he was doing the right thing. And therefore, you might have said that what he had done was acceptable to the gods. Any other answers? All right. And I'm not sure if this would be included in what John said, but the idea that his inner oracle was telling him that his acceptance of death was the right course to follow, that he was doing the right thing by accepting death. Number 6, in the third part of the selection, Socrates discusses 2 ways in which death might be considered a gain. What are those ways? Mia?
Either death is a state of nothingness and utter unconsciousness, or as men say, there's a change and migration of the soul from this world to another.
Okay, so if it's the first one, then he just thinks he's going into a peaceful sleep. And if it's another place, then he'll be reunited with others who have died. So that would be a good thing. So either both those things. So 2 points on number 6. One to say that it's a state of nothingness, and the other is that it's a journey to another place. Any questions? Number 7, in a later work, The Republic, Plato wrote about an ideal community ruled by a person with the highest intellect and greatest insight. How might Socrates' fate have differed in such a community? Amelia?
That maybe as a wise man that was in death, that they wouldn't have killed him.
Right, they would have considered him a wise man. Right. Any question about your answer? All right, so there are, looks like 8 points altogether on this page. So just put a number at the top of how many you missed and circle it. Make sure your name is on it. I will collect it, record it, and give it back to you because you're going to need the back. Oh, that was on the front and back? Okay. Thank you. This is a little different than mine.
Wow, that's so cool.
Thank you. Well, the last person we talked about of the philosophers was Socrates. And this is the famous painting of the death of Socrates. It's taken from a person who was there and who took a video of it. So I thought we might like to watch the video of the death of Socrates. Okay, where is it? Okay. Move it over. So here is the death of Socrates.
Socrates, the trial is over. Here's your hemlock. Ah, thank you. Well, what was the verdict? When do I get out of here? For Socrates, the verdict was death. Death? You gotta be kidding me. For what? For teaching the youth wisdom. Well, I'll take it all back. Call him in here. I'll renounce everything. Let's get out of here. Let's go get some Chinese food. But Socrates, you drank the hemlock. For what? It's poisonous. It is? Since when? Didn't you know hemlock is poisonous? I do now. Look, I only know general things. What is truth? What is justice? I never learned details. I don't know what is poisonous and what is not poisonous. This is the kind of thing that irritates me about you guys. Oh. All right. Well, I'm going to die. So what? When does this stuff take effect? 2, 3 years? 2, 3 minutes? What a lousy day this was. All right. I'm going to live here, and I'm going to die. You know what's going to happen? You guys are going to go out, and you'll have dinner, and you'll sit and stare at each other. I was the only one who ever talked in this whole group. It was always Socrates, what is truth? Socrates, what is the nature of the good? Socrates, what should I order? Socrates, what are you having? And not once did anyone ever say, Socrates, hemlock is poison. Hey, Leo, how did I do that? What? Make your body like rubber. Wow. You know, I could eat 1,000 chocolate chip cookies right now. I'm okay. I feel better. Must have been just a passing. Later. Come to me. Yes, Master. he said, "Come, Mr. Taliban, telling me banana. Then I come, and me wanna go home."
Okay, wasn't that great that we have that video of his death? You're not responding. You didn't think it was great that we had that video? Somebody was there to shoot that? Okay. Okay. Well, let's go on to Socrates' student, Plato. He was the most famous pupil of Socrates, and he established a school of philosophy and science in Athens called the Academy. He authored a book called Republic. If you'd like to read that, we have it on the shelf back here. In that book, he gave a plan for an ideal society and government, in which he argued that too much liberty and freedom without restraint often leads to anarchy. What is anarchy? No one knows the word anarchy? What is archy? We talked about different forms of government called monarchy, oligarchy. What's archy?
Rule.
Yes, rule. And so when you put an A in front of a word, or an AN in this case in front of a word, what does that do to the word? It makes a negative. So anarchy would be without rule, or no rule. So that means no one's in charge. Usually there's chaos because no one is ruling. And that's what he felt would happen if there was too much liberty and freedom. He talked about the nature of true reality. He said true reality must be permanent or eternal. Therefore, it must lie outside the physical world. So true reality is not what we see in the physical world. It must be something that's outside the physical world, because what we see in the physical world ceases to exist sometimes. And so the true reality must be outside the physical world. You follow his thinking? He said things on earth are mere shadows or imperfect reflections of their eternal counterparts or forms in the unseen realm of eternity. So he believed in that which was in the non-material world as being the true reality. That which is in the material world is simply a shadow of the reality. And so he pictured it like this. Like if you were watching puppeteers perform, and there's a light behind them, and they're making shadows on the wall. You know, you can see back here they're making shadows, and you're up here watching. You're a prisoner in the physical world, and all you're seeing is the shadow of things. But in reality, this is what's true. It's back here. So the physical world is not the true reality. The true reality is a spiritual world, which is behind the physical. Let me see if I can illustrate it for you. I want you to close your eyes. Everybody close your eyes. And I want you to picture a circle. Okay, everybody picture a circle? All right, now open your eyes and somewhere on your piece of paper, draw a circle. Now, which reflects a true circle? What was in your mind, or what you wrote on paper?
Your mind.
What you wrote on paper isn't perfect, is it?
No.
But in your mind, you pictured a perfect circle, did you not? That's what Socrates means. The true reality is not what you see in the physical world, it is the idea of that thing, that object, which is in the world of ideas or a spiritual world. Do you follow what he's thinking? That's the true reality. All right. So he talked about being inside the cave and outside the cave. So if you're inside the cave, that's the visible realm, and that's where you see the shadow of the reality. You have imagination, and you have conviction in here. Because you have the shadow projections. There are figures projecting shadows. That's what your conviction is, that there are figures that are doing that. And if you could get out of the cave and go out into where the sun is, that's where you discover the real good. In the invisible realm, that's the realm of knowledge that's outside the cave, and that's when you encounter enlightenment, there's progress. If you can break away from the physical existence and get into the non-material, the spiritual, that's where you get true knowledge. Mathematical knowledge, he says you go outside, you're dazzled by the sunlight, so you see only shadows. And then there's dialectical reason, where you adjust to the sunlight, perceive visible objects, and apprehend the sun. So the way that you gain a sense of the true reality is getting out of the physical realm and into a more spiritual realm. Plato taught that the human soul is divided into three parts, one of which is predominant in each person. So each of us has three parts, but each one of us has a different part that's the dominant part of the three. He says the state would function best if each person was given a role in society in accordance with his predominant characteristic. So society would function best if you knew what your dominant part was and did a job that reflected that dominant part. All right, so he says that there are people down here whose appetite is their most dominant area, and so they should be workers. Those whose dominant area is courage, they should be soldiers. Those whose dominant area is reason should be the kings, the one who is ruling. And so the ideal man is the one in which reason is the dominant area, followed by courage and appetite. And then that's the kind of person that would make the best king or ruler as well. All right, so the areas, he says, are desire, or that would be appetite, same thing, whose key virtue needs to be temperance. You need to have control of your desires. The next one is spirit, which is the same as courage. That's superior to desire. These are the guardians of the state, the military, whose key virtue needs to be courage. And then the third is reason, which is the highest category. Those are the philosopher kings, those who are using reason. They're the ones that should be ruling. Their key virtue needs to be knowledge. They need to gain more and more knowledge. And so once you discover what is your predominant area, that's what you continue to work on, and you get a job that reflected that. Now, only the few were capable of making laws and ruling properly. Therefore, democracy is a bad idea, because democracy tries to involve everybody in ruling. And Plato said, no, only the few that are up here should be ruling. Because if you have democracy, that leads to mob rule. By the way, where do you think Plato placed himself? Yeah, he placed himself up here. All right, any questions about Plato and what he believed? Now, Plato also had a student who became famous, a famous philosopher. His name is Aristotle. Aristotle not only was a student of Plato, but also was the tutor of Alexander the Great. Aristotle said everything is subject to change. As Heraclitus said, you never step into the same river twice. There's always something different there. Everything's changing all the time. And this change is caused by something, leading to a chain of causers, stretching back to something that caused motion, but remains unmoved itself. You see what he's saying? Everything is caused by the motion of something before it. Therefore, there must be an initial mover that caused everything to move, which itself was not moving. He called that the unmoved mover, or the prime mover. That's the cause which actualizes the potential and everything else. That's the one cause of everything. Some call it the uncaused cause. So the cause of the universe, he said, must be God. There has to be an initial mover of everything. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that Aristotle proposed that the heavens were literally composed of 55 concentric crystalline spheres to which the celestial objects were attached and which rotated at different velocities. But the angular velocity was constant for a given sphere, with the Earth at the center. And so you see on this sphere, the Earth is in the center, then the moon goes around it, Mercury, Venus, the sun. So there's how he viewed the universe, as in these different concentric circles. And then the prime mover is outside all that. The prime mover is what started it all. Any questions so far? Now, this idea of the prime mover is something that is picked up later by St. Thomas Aquinas. During the Middle Ages, what we call Middle Ages, he was a follower of Christ who said, yeah, there must be a prime mover. There must be someone who started it all, as an argument for the existence of God. And we call that, as we learned in Bible class, the cosmological argument for the existence of God. There has to be someone, something that started it all, that caused it all. So some of that thinking comes, we could say, from Aristotle. Aristotle is considered the father of the scientific method. Why? Because he believed that true reality was not, as his mentor Plato said in another world. He said that true reality is the physical world in which we live. Now, he also believed that the ape was an intermediate form of man. So he believed that men came from apes. And maybe that's where that originated as well, that idea, picked up by evolutionists later. The only thing distinguishing man from the other animals, he said, is that man is rational. Man can think. He also believed that life forms sprang spontaneously from non-living matter. What do we call that? Life forms sprang spontaneously from non-living matter. Spontaneous generation. Generation means life. Spontaneous generation is the idea that life comes from non-living matter. And that's something that was believed by people through many, many centuries. Still the time of Louis Pasteur. You've heard of Pasteur, I hope. Pasteur demonstrated that life does not come from non-living matter. That a fly comes from a maggot that was in the meat. The meat didn't turn into a fly. A frog wasn't something that just came out of a log, but that has life behind it. Life cannot come from non-life. But of course, Darwin taught the opposite. He said there had to have been a time when life came from non-life. So to be an evolutionist, you have to believe in spontaneous generation that happened at least once, which otherwise scientists would say is totally ridiculous. And Aristotle believed that it was something that was true. He also is the one who developed what's called the syllogism. Oops, I forgot to click that one. True reality is in the physical world. He developed the syllogism, which is a 3-step logical process of thinking. So if A is true and then B is true, then C must be true. So for example, if I said, I think some that aren't true, I'm trying to think of one that is true. Cats say meow. The next step, say Bosco is a cat, therefore Bosco says meow. Or I could say Bosco says meow, therefore Bosco is a cat. So it says it's called a syllogism. One thing is true, and then if another thing is true, then the third thing is a result of that. And I think we'll do something with that a little bit later on. All right, so that's Aristotle. Any questions about Aristotle? He wrote a work called Organon, which has to do with logic. Oh, there's the argument about the prime mover. Sorry, I didn't get that up there earlier for you to see. There must be a prime mover or unmoved mover which actualizes the potential and everything else. This cause of the universe must be God. Oh, here's a syllogism coming up. Socrates is a man. A. B. All men are mortal. C. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. That's a syllogism. Have you come across syllogisms in math class or in some other class in the past?
We're doing this.
What is it?
Stuff. Copies.
Okay, just lay it on my desk, please.
All right. There.
Thank you. Aristotle believed that the world was made up of 4 elements: fire, air, water, and earth. And each has its natural place in the universe. So again, his attention was on the physical world. Plato was on the other world, where he thought the true reality was. Now there's a famous painting which has a lot of the philosophers in it, but if we narrow it down to the 2 in the middle, it is Plato and Aristotle. And the painter has given us a clue as to what they thought about reality. If you notice here is Plato. He says reality can only be known outside of the material universe. And so what is he doing? He's pointing up, outside the material universe. Aristotle has his hand like that, because he says reality can only be known by studying the material universe. It's right here. It's the material universe that's important. So that's Aristotle, and that's Plato. All right, any questions about those two? All right, let's go to some other philosophers. 2 of them, Epicureans and Stoics. Epicurus believed that happiness and pleasure can be achieved through the avoidance of pain and fear. So his primary objective was to enjoy life, to have pleasure. And the way you do that is to avoid pain, avoid fear. So embrace all you can. Have all the fun that you can now. And don't allow pain and fear to be a part of your life. Okay? Any questions about that? Epicureanism then is the pursuit of pleasure. Are the people today in our country, in our culture, that are Epicureans? They're just pursuing pleasure? I think you have to say that a lot of people follow that, right? Stoicism, it comes from the philosopher Zeno, in which he said that fixed laws ordered the affairs of men and the universe. In other words, what happens in your life is already determined. And there's nothing you do to change it, and nothing you do causes it. And so since you can't do anything to change it, you didn't cause it, then why get too happy or too sad about anything? Because there's nothing you can do about it. Just accept your fate and live a life of duty and self-control. So the Stoics tended to be people who did not show emotion, because that would go against their belief that everything happens to you, you don't have any role in it. So why get happy, why get sad? Just keep going. All right, any questions about Stoicism? Do you know anybody that's Stoic? That might be a little harder to spot. There's some people maybe that you could point to that never seem to show any emotion. Can't tell if they're happy or sad. They always look the same. They might have a rather stoic viewpoint on life. Are you looking at Griff? No, Griff's not stoic. I can tell that. Griff likes to smile and have fun, right?
Yeah.
All right. So the way to remember this: Epicureanism, happiness and pleasure, avoid pain. Zeno, the Stoics, just accept your fate and don't get emotional. Any questions about those? All right, those are the philosophers, the major philosophers and philosophies that came from Greek, the Greek culture of Hellenism. Tomorrow we'll look at their contributions, that is the Greek contributions in other areas of science and so on. So for tomorrow, to keep us on track with where we want to be, I want you to read pages 64 to 70 and do the section review on page 70. So we're going to questions on page 70. Do you have any questions? Make sure that you are looking over your material every night, because unless you're familiar with Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, you're not going to be able to keep in your heads the difference between them, and Epicureans and the Stoics. So you need to go over those things every day. Otherwise, you're going to get time for the test, which is coming up very soon, and be overwhelmed with all the material. So make sure you're going over it each day. As I said before, explain it to someone tonight, what you learned today, and that'll help get it into your brain. So much the better. Any questions?